How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Ghoulish with me, Max Booth, a host who was undead. I died, I was brought back to life so I could continue to do a spooky podcast, which you are listening to right now. It's a brand new year, it's the year 2022 for anyone listening. It's the beginning of it. Only a couple days into the year, anything could happen. We might all die and then get revived to begin new spooky podcasts. No one can really say. But until we find out, I have a new episode with Adam Franti talking about Tommyknockers. Not the Stephen King book, not the adaptation either. We're talking about the real Tommyknockers. The little pesky characters that hide in mountain mines and raise havoc. Don't know what the hell I'm talking about? That's okay, because, Ghoulish is an educational podcast. For anyone listening, we teach you things. And this episode of the podcast, we're teaching you everything you need to know about Tommyknockers. And I'm talking to Adam today to celebrate my new anthology called Lost Contact. Because Adam is in the book. He has a short story in the anthology. It's a mind-blowing type of story. Just absolute A-plus quality writing. I believe this is his first published piece of fiction. So, I'm pretty excited to have found his fiction in the old slush pile. I'm thrilled I had the chance to publish it. And it's out now. You can go buy Lost Contact any place you buy books. I'll have a link to the book in the show notes. Click the link, go to the website, buy it, read it, leave a review, But until then, let's just listen to Let's listen to the conversation I had with Adam about Tommyknockers. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. So for today's episode, you suggested we talk about Tommyknockers, but before we get anyone listening too excited, we are not talking about the much acclaimed Stephen King novel. We are talking about something else. And what is that?
Tommyknockers are like folklore creatures that are said to live deep in mines. And so like if you're working in a mine, right, mines usually have these like wooden struts that kind of help keep everything from collapsing. And every now and again, like it's probably just that like the weight shifts and wood creaks and whatnot, you hear these knocks that come from like really deep in the mine. And so like ever since there have been mines, there have been stories about whatever you call them, dwarves or Tommyknockers or goblins or whatever creatures that are said to like live deep in there. There's this very interesting sort of relationship between miners and Tommyknockers, whether they're good or bad, whether they sort of foretelling doom or they bring it. I've always just been kind of interested in that sort of like mythical monster stuff.
The name itself, I get where the knockle of Tommyknocker comes from. Where does Tommy come from? Does the word Tommy mean something as a noun that I just don't know about?
I'm not sure. That's a really good question.
Okay.
That's not something I've like, because I guess my relationship to it is very casual. Like it wasn't like I was like really deep in research
Yeah.
on it or anything, but like, I was writing this story, and part of it was inspired by I was trapped in West Virginia for a couple of days on a road trip.
Okay.
I'll tell you about it in a minute if you want.
Yes.
But then part of it was I've always been fascinated with this, like, I don't know, this, you literally blow up mountains to get at mines and stuff. And the way mining companies always talk about it is, of course, like, oh, this is more efficient. We're all going to make more tons of money and everything. What they do is they blow up a mountain, trash the ecology of the local area, and then just leave. Right. That's it. That's what happens. Right. So I had this story that was sort of set, and there's sort of ghosty stuff, and there's a traumatic past and everything. And a lot of it revolves around this town it has been murdered because of a mine, and connecting it to this sort of idea of Tommyknockers. Like, what are they up to after their mine gets blown up? Like, what's happening down there? And it just sort of like these little disparate elements sort of clicked when I was writing that story. So it wasn't like I went and read all the books about Cornish or Welsh folklore or whatever, but no, that's a good question. I don't know where Tommyknocker comes from. I think it might just be one of those words that kind of like sounds fun.
It does sound fun. I love the name.
Yeah. And I know, like, oh man, I can't remember it anymore, but like my sort of family history, I had a lot of Finnish ancestors who came over from Finland, and they worked in like copper mines in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And they have their version of the Tommyknocker too, but I can't remember the Finnish term for it. But it's basically the same thing, right? It's like this little creature that lives in the mine, and it either helps or doesn't, right? Depending on your perspective. But I like, most sort of folk monsters are kind of like that. You'll find perspectives that are working, it's helping you, or it's this sort of like creature that wants to trick you or eat your children or whatever. And like the same creature has both of those sort of aspects depending on which story you're reading or telling.
I read something similar today. I didn't do a ton of research into this because I know you are practically a Tommyknocker scholar at this point. You've done it. You've read all the books. But,
right.
But I read some line about how they would expect the people to leave out a cake at the end of every day, and if you didn't, then you would have bad luck. Do you know anything about this?
So yeah, like it's this sort of like, I don't know the like specific stuff, because like it even changes like depending on the, I guess, nationality of the miners and where the mines are. So like, West Virginia coal mines are going to have a slightly different take on Tommyknockers than, copper miners in the UP. But yeah, like the idea that you're sort of trespassing on their space, right? Like you're blowing holes in their mountain and you're kind of like digging through their house. There's this sort of like little thing. Yeah, just like leave them a treat at the end of the shift. Make sure that they know that you're respectful of their space, even though your job as a miner is to loot the place.
Yeah, it's basically a B&E.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Has there been much like documentation sounds way too official, but has there been much writing of like what the physical appearance of these things might look like? I get the impression they're kind of leprechaunish.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's like it varies depending on like sort of what kind of tradition you're looking at. So I think like leprechaun is kind of the sort of the mean kind of description from everything I've seen. Like just kind of, they're humanoid, right? They might have like different colored skin. They might have weird hair or long noses or something like that. But again, those are all sort of very disparate.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a few minutes ago you were trapped for several days. Please, I would like to know about that, because maybe this does tie into your story in Lost Contact, which you should probably tell the folks a little bit about. I kind of skipped over that in the beginning. So let's go through what that story is, what the genesis of that was. Sounds like it was you being trapped. So please go on.
Part of it was, So I went to college. When I went to college, and I double majored in history and in creative writing. And I wrote a ton of short stories in college and everything. And I never really pursued publication at all. And then after that, I sort of wrote every now and again and concentrated mostly on novels. And I actually I'm more of a reader and writer of science fiction and fantasy than I am horror. I'm more of a horror gamer. Like I play like Call of Cthulhu and Eclipse Phase and a few other sort of like horror RPGs. But I think if I'm if I'm remembering the timeline right, because this was like last year when all this happened, I read The Only Good Indians, so Stephen Graham Jones, probably his biggest book recently, and I was like, holy shit! And I read like everything else that he wrote, and I decided like I'm gonna write short stories again. And so I saw someone, I think it was on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, put out the call for Lost Contact. So I was like, oh, I'll give it a shot. It's been a while since I wrote a short story. I wrote like 3 short stories based on that little thing. And I was like sort of tortured because I went through and read the old collections and I was like, oh man, which one's going to fit the best? I don't really know. And I like, when I sent it, I wasn't really sure. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to be the one. I think like the other 2 are more interesting. They have like, and I just didn't know. And then, so like, as I was reading through the other collection, and as I was following you on Twitter, I was like, oh, I think I did pick the right one. And it was mostly that because there's a sinister cop in that one. Funeral is the name of the story. Sorry, I had to remember it. But yeah, so I was just sort of thinking like, okay, this sort of theme, Lost Contact, and I had this other one that was much more sort of science fiction-y, and another one that was like set in a sort of weird alternate history thing, and this one was more personal and intimate, I guess. It's about a guy whose twin brother had gone missing like a year or 2 before in this crummy nowhere town in West Virginia, and he's driving down there basically to give his brother a send-off because he was missing. They never found his body, so they never really had like an official funeral. And so he's just sort of taking this kind of personal, kind of emotional quest to go and give his brother a send-off. And just weird shit happens in the town. It's a creepy little grungy town that no one lives in anymore except like cops, and there's like closed down, old state forest and this corpse of a mountain that's overlooking the whole town because it had been, blown up, as we talked about before, to mine all the minerals, and then the company just left. So I drew a lot of inspiration, I guess, from road trips and just being sort of out of place and being in a place where like things just don't make sense, like, so I didn't draw too much from it from personal experience, just generally kind of on the road trip. But I was trapped in West Virginia, and the point of setting it in West Virginia was very deliberate because it was like, I remember being in West Virginia, it sucked. So I apologize for any listeners who are from West Virginia. I'm sure there are parts of West Virginia that are beautiful and lovely. Not the part I was in, though.
I haven't been to that state, so anything I know about it, I know from yours truly. So you've painted a great example of what it's like to be in that state. I'm sure
the West Virginia Tourist Board is really going to reach out to me and be like, yeah, this was great. So like, yeah, I got trapped there. So I was on a road trip with a few friends. This was back when I worked. I worked as the term is historical interpreter on Mackinac Island, which is like a tourist town in Michigan. And I worked, basically I wore like a 1880s US military uniform, and I walked around with a rifle and I talked to people about history. I went with a group of people who also worked up there to a reenactment in Virginia. And this was in like 2013, I think, like, so fall 2013. And we went down and we went to like Jamestown, and we went to Colonial Williamsburg, and we went to all these museums and everything in Virginia. And then we were planning on driving back from Williamsburg back up to Michigan, and that was it. And so our route took us through West Virginia. And the car that we'd been driving, and we've been on this for like a week, right? Like the reenactment was 2 days. We spent 2 days at Williamsburg. We'd been on the road for a week in this sort of like tiny SUV. And we're driving, and like, West Virginia is very mountainous. So the roads just go like up, like these sort of waveforms constantly, and they go on these like dead man curves and everything. And like, we're driving in Michigan's flat, right? It's just flat. The roads aren't in great condition, but they're generally flat and straight.
Yeah, it's flat and a lot of potholes.
Yeah. So like, we can navigate around the potholes and everything, but like West Virginia drivers have this like horrific, I guess it's a skill of driving like 80, 90 miles an hour down these like dead man curves and like giving you mean looks because you're not going that fast as they're driving past you. And so it's like, God, this place is a horror show. But so we ended up breaking down. And it turned out that the problem was there was a bubble in the oil line. And the bubble of air was hotter than the oil. So whenever the bubble of air went past the temperature sensor for the oil gauge, it triggered that the engine was overheating and it shut the engine off. So our car shut off in the middle of like a West Virginia road on the side of the highway. And so like we went out and there were a couple of us that kind of know a little bit about cars and we're looking at it and it's like nothing, this doesn't look like it's overheating. This looks fine. Let's just see if we can start it back up and go. And we did, and we're like, oh, great, that was weird. And then we drove another mile and it broke down again. And we broke down outside of a town. First, it was a place called Pax, P-A-X. And it was like 10 miles outside of a bigger town called Beckley. And we ended up like driving this like half a mile at a time off the highway exit into Pax. And all that we could find in Pax was a gas station combined with like a restaurant and a bus stop.
What time of day is this?
This was, oh, I remember exactly. It was like 5:15
p.m.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
like 5:15 p.m.
Okay.
And because I remember because we ended up leaving 2 days later at about 5:15, like literally 48 hours to the minute of the first time we broke down. So we ended up like calling a tow truck. Tow truck came and picked us up and drove us back all the way to Beckley to like they have a like a Buick or whatever it was, like auto mall service station or whatever. And so we had to like drop this thing off and we had to write on, you write on like what the problem is sheet that you put in like the after hours collection box or whatever. And it, this is old Buick, whatever, Rendezvous, I think it was. And so it's got like little strips that are kind of like keeping some of the parts of the thing together. And there's like some duct tape around the bumper. And we have to like write like, please disregard, that's not the issue. Like, and we put like, we're out of town. We're going to be staying at this place. Like, please get to work on it as quickly as you can. And just like, let us know right away. So it starts this whole saga of just, they are replacing every part of the engine and nothing's working. And at one point they're like, oh, we got it. Cause they're having it run on like a treadmill, right? Like in their little service station. And it's like, fine, nothing's happening. But then they send a guy out to drive it around. And then of course he drives up into the mountains where there's no cell phone service. Then the thing happens, right? So he had to get it towed back. And so like, this just went back and forth for 2 days. And they replaced almost every single part of the whole engine. And in the meantime, we had like friends and family offering to like buy us plane tickets or like send a car or whatever. And one of the guys who was on the trip with us, like his girlfriend drove down from Ohio where she was staying with her brother, picked him and a couple of other people up and drove away. And so at the end, it was me and a close friend of mine and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And then we like drove out starting from West Virginia at like 5 p.m. and drove all the way back up to Michigan. It was like a 7-hour drive. And we had to, because they never fixed the car. So we had to like rent the only truck in the rental places in West Virginia that could tow something. We had to buy a tow attachment and then rent like a dolly from U-Haul and then we had to drive up this thing onto it ourselves because nobody at the auto mall would help us.
Oh my God.
So we finally pulled out of this place. And it was like just this, if you imagine ever being on a road trip, you're sort of slap happy, right? You probably haven't slept very well. You've been probably like eating indifferently the whole time. And it's just like, you just want to be home. You just want to end. And we're fucking stuck here after a week, just like going nuts. And we spent like the whole time in the lobby of the place because we knew that if we left, they just would just put it on the back burner and they just like get to it when they got to it. And like having to stare at us in their lobby as other people are trying to conduct their business. We thought maybe that'll urge them to try to fix it for us.
So how did you said it was a bubble in the oil? How did that get discovered once you got back to Michigan?
Yeah, so
Ohio?
right, like once we got to Michigan, they the guy who owned it like took it to just the mechanic they always take their cars to and everything. And they didn't even get out of the parking lot before the guy came out to tell them what the problem was. So all that needed to have been done was to just bleed the oil line and then put more oil in and make sure that it was sealed.
Wow.
That's it. Because there was this like a small crack in one of the like the gaskets or something.
Yeah.
The air had gotten in there at some point, but it would have been a few hours to fix it and 2 cheap parts rather than basically taking apart the entire engine and selling us, those replacement parts that ended up doing nothing.
Do you think do you think there's a chance they knew what was wrong with it and they just thought they could just milk you of some money?
Oh, I think there's a part of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I don't know, because they're so nice to your face,
Yeah.
It's
either that or they will just incompetent.
Right. And so like they my friend Andrew, who it was like his car, they ended up trying to contact Buick to like lodge a complaint to see if they could get some of this like taken care of through something, and they said no, they did their due diligence. So I don't know. I'm not willing to go and say like, yeah, they were definitely fleecing us, but like there's a portion of it that we're from out of town, we're in a hurry, we're going to say yes to anything that we might think will fix it and get us back on the road. And in the meantime, we got to see the lovely sights of Beckley, West Virginia, which is an auto mall, some fast food restaurants, and I think there was actually an old mining museum.
Did you
we didn't go to
no?
because it was closed.
Of course it was.
Yeah, and it's like we would have loved to. We would love to spend a couple of hours there because anything's better than like the lobby of the Beckley Auto Mall, but we couldn't because everything was closed.
You seem to know a lot about mines. What's your history with mines?
Not much. I know that my family, again, like most of my family, my paternal family are all like Finnish miners. And very quickly they turned from Finnish miners into working for the post office because it's better than working in a friggin' mine. But yeah, so Michigan has you go through elementary school here in Michigan and you'll learn about copper mining. And there are a lot of the high profile copper like mine strikes and stuff happened in the Upper Peninsula and whatnot. So it's always just been something I've been interested in a class conscious sort of a way. More than it's like I never wanted to be a miner. Certainly.
Yeah. Well, everyone is until it's 18. That's right. I apologize.
Right.
Listen, this podcast was not going to happen with at least one of those jokes. I've bit my tongue until now. Be proud of me.
We've made it 20 minutes. Yeah, pretty good.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's been something that like I find it interesting mostly because I don't know, it's so American, I guess. I mean, and so my after I went to undergraduate, I have a master's degree in history, but it's mostly in like 19th century military history. But there's like everything's connected. Like the way that like I'm more of I study like cultural history, just specializing on how culture sort of manifests in the military rather than like these guys shot better, right? They have a +2 bonus to their, whatever. So I don't know. Mining is it's interesting because it's one of these occupations that's like it's omnipresent in human history, and the way that it sort of became organized in the 19th century is very important to cultural trends at large in American history. And so I think like that, I'm more attracted to that as like a legacy of places like Beckley, of places like, Western West Virginia, places like, Calumet in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan here and everything, and how these towns like Calumet, Michigan was nothing. There was no one lived there until around 1900. This is after they had discovered copper up there, and they had picked up all the pieces that were just on the ground, and they decided we're going to build this huge industry. So they just connect it to these huge rail lines and everything, and they have all this logistics and everything, and suddenly like you've got a place that no one lived like ever in human history, right? No one lived there. You might have passed through, but nobody lived there. And suddenly you have this enormous town of 20 or 30 or 40 or 50,000 people, and it lasts there for 25 years and then it's gone again, right? And like it's so I don't know, unique, right? Like these like boom towns and all this stuff where it's just like you have this flash where all this stuff happens. And like Calumet, Michigan, like I don't know if you ever heard of the Italian Hall disaster.
No, please tell me.
One of these rather famous events in like I guess labor history. And there's a strike going on. This was 1913. So the miners were striking against the mine company owners and everything, and they were celebrating Christmas at a place called the Italian Hall, this kind of dance hall, this nice little just venue for everything. And it was all the miners and their families there and everything. And someone at some point shouted that there was a fire. And everybody stampeded to get out of the exit, but the doors opened to the inside and we're down a flight of stairs. So everybody had charged down the flight of stairs, couldn't open the doors because everybody was piling in behind them. And dozens of people died, including women and children. And so like the question was whether or not it was like somebody who was sympathizing with the mine owners had like false flagged it, right? Had just gone and yelled fire just to kind of like ruin everybody's night. Not that they necessarily wanted to like kill a bunch of people, but that's what ended up happening, right? So we have all these towns that like, thousands of years, nothing's there. And then suddenly there's 60,000 people living there and most of them are miners. And all of this trauma happens in that very short amount of time, and then nothing again, right? And then it's just another tiny American town. And that's actually where my wife grew up, in Calumet. So yeah, the first few times I went to like visit her family, I made this extremely long drive. And if you, and for your listeners who aren't familiar necessarily with Michigan, like you can get pretty much anywhere in the Lower Peninsula in 3 or 4 hours, but like driving up over the Mackinac Bridge and then west again, it's like 10-12 hour drive.
Yeah, it's really different, I'm told. Yeah,
it's like, and it's empty, right? And it's like all of these towns are very small, and almost all of them are old mining towns or logging towns. And so again, like the industries have kind of come through and just gone, and it's left as sort of like ghost towns everywhere. And it's just it's a very different place. I'm also convinced that Cthulhu lives in Lake Superior. You'll never convince me otherwise.
I have no way to argue your case. I mean, seems legit to me. Have you written much else about like all this besides the Australian Lost Contact? Because this is like everything you're telling me. It's like this needs to be like a fucking novel. This mining saga of a town from beginning to end. Be a great book.
So I'm actually working on a book now that's set in a fictional Michigan town, and it has some of these themes, and this actually like it's a town that I've set some of my Call of Cthulhu games in. And so it has this sort of like weird richness, because every time we play a different game in it, like there's a new element that is introduced by either me or the players or whatever else. But like the town is sort of, a lot of it is kind of a microcosm of a lot of this stuff, right? Where it's like it has this fictional history, but it's sort of a combination of a bunch of these elements of Michigan towns and West Virginia towns and everything else everywhere. So it has like it's like this history with like the streetcar system and everything. And it's just like one of these like goofy towns where the joke is kind of like they really cornered an industry at the exact moment like the world passed that industry by, right? So it's like they finally get this huge like complex like beautiful building of this like regional rail hub in like 1925, like right before like all of the infrastructure for like streetcars and everything just utterly collapses. And they build the biggest bank in the state and everything right in 1929, right before the Great Depression. And like so it has this sort of like kind of comical where it's like they get really good at something and then the industry
just too late.
And and that's kind of like this sort of state of arrested development that this town and everybody who lives in it kind of lives in. But it's still early. I have like an outline, and I've written a good chunk of it. And I guess the pitch would be that the main character is a high school girl who does urban exploration. Yeah. So like, if you ever watch those urbex like YouTube videos or whatever, just people going into abandoned buildings, and she does it in this tiny weird town with a whole bunch of these haunted, empty, abandoned buildings. And so she ends up going to this old library building, and while she's there, she ends up witnessing this like ritualistic, possibly satanic police murder.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And then she sort of has to deal with the fact that she's got that going on. And like as she's like, what the hell is, why was it that creepy? Why was it like, what was going on? So like as she's sort of trying to uncover what's going on with it, she's being fucked with by the police. And
it's bad enough to witness a cops killing someone, but to have some spooky occult stuff possibly going on, that's just a whole new level. I like that. But speaking of like exploring those like abandoned malls and stuff, there's actually a story in Lost Contact where a guy is obsessed with those videos. All he does is watch those videos, and he's like, it's one of those things. Well, I'm no longer a child, and I have a wife and a kid, and everything's passed me by, and all my old hangout places are gone. So I'm just going to obsess over these videos. I have a episode of the podcast coming out. Either before this one or after this one, sometime in November, specifically about those videos. It's all really fascinating and pretty spooky, I think.
I like, because it's the same stuff we've been talking about, right? It's like this sense of this time capsule that's just in a building, right? Like there's so much about just the empty shell of a building that you can even just walking around alone in it, right? Or like at night. And a lot of the urban exploration videos and stuff are like, they're made to be kind of spooky, right? They're sort of like, they're less about like architecture or history or whatever. And it's just like, man, this is pretty fucked up and spooky, right? And and I like that enough. Like I like that sort of atmospheric thing enough. But like every time I watch one, I just like, I go and I look up anything I can find about the history of the building and like when was it abandoned and why was it abandoned. Because I've watched a couple about like abandoned libraries, and there's still like mountains of books in there.
What?
Right? They're like, all the shelves are still in there. There's, sometimes old computers and stuff are still just left behind. And so like, what is it about the way our society's organized where like that happens?
That's fucking crazy. I never even thought about abandoned libraries.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's there's just something like very captivating to me about that kind of thing. Even if like the video is just like, a guy with a camera walking around and looking at fire escapes and
they go
digging through trash or whatever, right?
They go, what was that noise?
Right.
Some creepy noise, guys.
Yeah. But then there are the videos where there's actually like people living there. And it's mostly, it's mostly homeless people or whatever. But like, that can be kind of like, oh God, because that the guy with the camera didn't see that, right? You can see like somebody peeking through a keyhole or something like that. Camera just goes on by. And then after you go and look at it, like, holy shit, like there was somebody like right next to you the whole time. And like that adds that sort of like top layer of the horror, right? Of the just unease. Like you don't know who's there. You don't know if somebody's watching you. You don't know anything, right? And it's
Plus, I think just like, especially with the shopping mall specifically, that's a place as a building completely occupied by people. And when you see videos of them just completely empty, these caskets, it's really just unsettling because that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. And it's, and they get abandoned because it's like, it's too expensive to like heat them, or they have to have renovations for safety concerns or whatever, and it's literally worth more just to let them rot, right? And that's, man, that says so much.
That's pretty ghoulish.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
ghoulish.
Thank you. I think we've mostly reached the end of this episode. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about concerning Tommyknockers or the story in Lost Contact?
No, other than like I'm really excited to read the rest of the collection.
Yeah,
because I really like Lost Films and Lost Signal. No, Lost Signal's the one I'm in, right? No, it was Lost Signals then Lost Films.
Yeah,
now it's Lost Contact. I got it.
It's really funny. Films. I've done maybe 5 episodes now with contributors of this anthology, and everyone mentions the other anthologies, and everyone gets the titles right. It's really funny to me.
I'm really looking forward to it. I know like I've had friends and family who are excited to read it too, just because like I've been writing forever. This is like my first officially published story and everything. So I'm really pumped to be a part of it. I think it's great.
Well, that's the best, man. Like from my standpoint, when we do these books or the magazine or whatever, when we get a story from someone who hasn't been published yet, and it's just amazing, and to have that opportunity to publish it, to be the first one to publish it, it's like the greatest high. It's so good. I'm glad you sent it to us. I'm glad we're publishing it. I'm glad we just talked about Tommyknockers. Do you want to plug social media, anything like that?
Not really. I'm not super active on Twitter, so like I might like just make a different account and everything, because mine's, I don't know, I barely use it.
That's fine. I don't think social media is necessary. That's fine with me.
Yeah, no, like I've got a fantasy novel that I'm trying to work the current. Like, sending a story is easy. You just send the story and you get a rejection or you don't.
Yeah.
Trying to like get like an agent for like a novel is much more nerve-wracking because like I spent 2 months writing this thing and another 3 or 4 editing it and everything and polishing it, and I've sent it to friends and I've got good feedback and I know it's pretty good, but it's like so much of it is it's just angsty, right?
Yeah. I don't know how to get an agent, man. Good luck with that.
Yeah. So much of that, a lot of the requests, because like with short stories you use like Moksha or whatever, right? It has like these little things, you just kind of plug everything in and send it. And like sending stuff to an agent's always got to be this like personal thing, and a lot of them ask if you have social media, and a lot of the stuff that's written toward people who are trying to get a novel published say that you should be active on Twitter and on writing Twitter and everything. So I sort of feel like I have to have one even if I don't really use it.
So I hate that mindset, but you're right. So many agents and big presses demand that, and it's terrible. But okay, that's fine. And that was Adam Franti talking about Tommyknockers to celebrate the release of Lost Contact. Available now. Go pick up a copy any place you buy books. Check out that link in the show notes. Buy a copy. Leave a review of the podcast on iTunes if you like it. If you don't like it, also leave a review. It will make me depressed to read negative reviews, so if that's something you like, you could do that to make me sad. You could leave a positive review to make me the opposite of sad. But the sadness will last longer than the happiness. The happiness is never long living. Long living? Yes. But the sadness is infinite. An infinite amount of sadness. Thank you for listening.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.